Right. Let's call today's special meeting to order. Thanks everyone for being here. I'll take the roll. Jim.
Here.
I think he's messing with me. Stella. Here. Ryan.
Present.
Vladimir.
Here.
And I, Shally Sturkey, am here as well. Would any board members like to provide comment on the agenda? Seeing none, may I please have a motion to approve the agenda as presented? Thank you, Vladimir. May I have a second? I'll second. Thank you, Stella. Motion to approve today's agenda as presented was made by Vladimir and seconded by Stella. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Great, motion passes unanimous. On to our study session, site concepts for the San Antonio Trail. Mrs. Scott.
Great. So we're happy to be here today. We'll do introductions in a minute, but I wanted to kind of set our focus and intention for the day. You'll notice that our concepts look a little bit different than the last time we were together. And after working with the team, it was really to get the most critical feedback and direction from the board at this time is around capacity and the number of buildings that we need to build. So I want you to think about all the other things we were talking about before. Shade, we were talking about line of sight for supervision. All of those things will come in time, but the most important direction we need is around the capacity and the number of buildings. So I want you all to be thinking that we're making an investment that will be within the Los Altos School District for the next 50 years plus. And we really are looking for what will provide us the most flexibility for years and years to come. And that flexibility could include a facilities allocation to the charter school. It could include a future LASD school, elementary, middle school. It could include lots of things. So we want to make sure that the direction you're giving will give us that most flexibility. The direction we've given to the team is that we're focusing somewhere between 500 to 600 students. If that's something different than you want, let us know today. And then, of course, we talked to the team also about, and we'd like to get that flexibility and meet that capacity for the lowest possible price. So big parameters to work with, but we're excited that our team is back. And I know they've spent a lot of time listening to you all at the last study session. And then Eric and I think have met with them twice since then. And we're excited to see kind of updates for today. So if you all want to introduce yourself, that would be great.
Sure. Amber, you want to start?
I'm Amber Emery from Block Construction.
I'm Ellen Powers from Block Construction.
Justine Weigel from Quattroki Clock Architects.
And Aaron Jobson, which are architects.
Nick Stephenson with Quattroki Art.
Then we have, I'm Tyler Sutton with Cumming Group. I'll be the bond program manager.
So
Take it from there.
Aaron's on.
All right. Sounds good. So as Sandra said, we heard your comments from last time, and all of the sort of more detailed things we're not going to get to have not been forgotten. And those are things that we'll incorporate, but it's hard to respond to those without knowing how many buildings we're building first. So we want to focus on that today. So you'll see we stripped a lot of all the site information today and really kind of simplified it down to just the information around capacity, building configurations, types of buildings, so we can focus on that. We have 4 overall concepts that we'll be talking about. And then within each of those, we looked at the 3 different grade level configurations. So TK to 6, TK to 8, and 4 to 8. And some of them, one of those may not have made sense, so you won't see it in here. So there are 9 total rather than 12, because a few of them dropped off because they just didn't make sense with that building configuration. So and with all of them, they have 2 two-story folio buildings that you can see in the 2 Ls, like on this one. They have the same gym and locker rooms. They have the same NPR. All of them have the library within the folio buildings. What changes is the number of folio buildings and also the location of the admin, moving around between there. And then obviously the sort of designation of which classrooms are in which spaces. As we talked about, we were looking to get, you'll see in the little capacity diagrams here, we're looking to get 2 classes in each grade. We're looking to get 2 special ed classrooms and 2 to 4 flex classrooms. in each configuration and try to end up with a capacity between kind of 500 to 600. So we'll kind of go through and walk through that with each one, and you'll see here kind of our notes around some things that might not match up with what we're looking for. And there's a little bit of cost information down here as well that Amber and Ellen provided, kind of a range of how much we're looking at for the cost here. And that's for everything, not just the buildings, but all of the site construction infrastructure across the whole site, which, as you know, is significant. So we'll kind of walk through each one of these. Please stop us at any point and ask any questions. But
Does the cost include the, like, 25% for overruns and stuff like that?
so this cost includes, this is total project cost. So this includes the construction, it includes the design and the engineering and the permitting, and it includes contingencies as well.
Just one more comment before we begin. I noticed it on this one and then on another concept. Just wherever possible, I would like to keep the same grade classrooms adjacent to each other for teacher collaboration.
Yep.
We can I notice you can't do that here with, like, for example, grade 1.
Yeah.
I think grade 5 on another.
Yeah, there are some constraints in certain
Yeah.
concepts.
Yeah, one of the other constraints that we're working with is there is a building code requirement to have any rooms used by students 2nd grade and lower have direct access to grade. So they don't have to go up and down stairs. There are exceptions to that. The exception to that is if they have their own separate circulation that's not used by older students. The code concern in there is essentially in an emergency, them being able to exit safely and not being trampled by older kids, essentially. So that's something that we're constrained by, and you'll see some notes about that as we go through, and you'll see us kind of working to try to meet that requirement wherever we can. In some cases, we've met that by putting some of those students on the 2nd floor and having the building separated, but in most cases, we're trying to just keep all those students on the 1st floor.
If you want to keep, say, TK on the 1st floor, why is special education on the 2nd floor?
Because there's no more room on the 1st floor in this building. And that is actually, in this case, that is one of the notes you'll note here, is that those are only on the 2nd grade, which is gonna be challenging for use by those smaller kids during the day. So that's exactly kind of what we're looking at. It's like, that's one reason why this one maybe doesn't really work that well. So that's exactly kind of what we want to highlight as we go through.
And then I want to point out one quick thing is the cost is the hard construction cost. It's not a lot of soft costs as well, which is like special inspections, testing, DSA, inspection of record, and you like furniture, fixtures, equipment. It's all has to be added to the cost. But that's that's the design.
That's the GMP.
Yeah.
Okay.
The GMP. Yeah.
So that's the cost for all of the construction plus the design and engineering.
How much is soft cost for it?
Depending for new construction for a brand new school site, I would probably budget at least 25% at least.
Might be a little hard because the design's already covered and that's 10% usually, or maybe it's 10% in there, so.
Yeah, depending.
Maybe 15 to 20. Yeah. Okay, so with that, we'll kind of jump in and I'll hand it over to Justine to talk through each of these scenarios as we go through. Concepts, well, you'll see at the top, it says concept 1 and then the grade level configuration. And that'll kind of be your guide through this, and you have them in front of you as well.
Thanks, Erin. So the first concept we're going to look at, as you can see, we have our gym, our NPR with admin as part of that. So that's a custom building, and then two-story folia buildings. And like Erin mentioned, the library will be in folia throughout all of these concepts. So this is one of the ones where we looked at where we put the admin into a custom building. And this version is the TK through 6 concept. So you can see we meet which one is the
Right.
yeah, thanks. We're meeting 2 classes per grade level for the TK through 6. We do have 2 special education classrooms and only 2 flex classrooms. So we were not able to get up to 4, but we do have 2. However, as was already pointed out, they are all currently on the 2nd floor. So that makes them difficult for the younger grades to access. So we do have that noted over here as one of the considerations for this concept. Another thing just to note is that our TK through kinder, those require oversized classrooms. So these are a little bit larger than the typical classrooms that grades 1 and up will be using. So we lose a little bit of classroom efficiency on the 1st floor, which is just highlighted by these hatched areas, which can be used for some other uses. Perhaps there's a small special education program dedicated to these lower grades that could fit in there. But that's why, for example, there's only 5 classrooms in this building instead of the typical 6 that you usually see in our Folia floor plan. Our total capacity is 418, so we are under that 500 student threshold. But we still wanted to present this one, just to give everybody an idea of what this looks like with our two-story Folia buildings and having admin, over here. This tight,
Where would the elevators be?
the elevators are in the corners of the building, so they're right here and right here.
And then there are 2 stairs. We should probably do. Each of these configurations, there'll be 4 stairs.
We can either take questions as each concept goes along, or I can continue on to the next one, whatever everybody's comfortable with.
Maybe go through like concept 1 and the 3
Okay.
rounds.
I think concept 1, we just have 2
Oh, yeah, that's
for
right.
this one, because
It's a work as a team.
Yeah. right. So the other grade configuration we studied for concept 1 is grades 4 through 8. So this one, we do have our 2 classes per grade. We also have 2 special education classrooms, and we have 4 flex classrooms. And we do have 6 spaces that are currently unassigned. So this could be used for future growth. You could add a 3rd classroom per grade level if that was desired. There's a couple options with this one. And the reason we have some extra space here too is in the previous configuration with the grade levels, we had those larger classrooms for TK and kinder, so that took up some space, but now these are all in the traditional size classrooms for grades 1 and above. So that's why we have some extra space in here too.
I think those are the 2 configurations for concept 1.
Mhm.
The TK to 8 doesn't work because it's just more classrooms than the TK to 6, which I already didn't quite have enough. Any questions about that?
Oh, one other thing to note is our capacity is 564 students for this one, because we did show a loading for the unassigned spaces. So that gets up to 564.
Assume you can add maybe 5 or 6 more flex classrooms.
You could, but you already have a lot of flex classrooms for like a ratio between the number of
Just-
standard classrooms
just
and regular
asking
ones.
for a friend.
Sure, but I think if you were really using this configuration for grades 4 through 8, you just have 3 classes of each grade. Right. And then it would fit pretty well.
And then could one of the flex rooms be, because sometimes science is a little
Yeah.
bit bigger, that could be one of the science.
Absolutely. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, that would be a perfect use for one of those rooms. Yeah, so if you did 3 classes of each grade, you'd end up essentially with 5 flex classrooms.
Well, it's not just for this plan, but any of the plans, including the upper grades, 7th and 8th. It wasn't clear to me that the 4 flex classrooms would be sufficient to run like our junior high program. So, some of those unassigned classrooms that we've said like, oh, you have capacity for more students. I don't know that that would necessarily be true. Just to replicate like the program that we have for our 7th and 8th graders.
Sure. I think that with the unassigned, it essentially gets us there.
Yeah.
Right? And so typically in a 6-8,
Right, but they would have a capacity of 0 then. Like the loading. would
Well,
be 0
the way loading works for a middle school is different than elementary school.
Oh, okay. So you.
Partly because like if, especially with those kind of specialty classrooms. On an elementary school, if you have an art classroom, 2nd grade students are either in the art classroom or they're in 2nd grade. When they're in the art classroom, no one else is in the 2nd grade room, right? So you have to count the art classroom as unassigned because it's used instead of something. But in a middle school, some kids are taking art and then other kids are taking English in that class at the same time. So
Okay,
basically
so it is
all the, yeah, so
Okay.
all the classrooms are loaded the same.
Okay,
And at this point, what the classrooms are called is just words, right? Really, it's just spaces and if this is a middle school kind of configuration, you'll have some classes that are English, some classes that are math, some classes that are electives, some classes that are set up for science and art and electives and those kind of things. And there's plenty of rooms here to do that. So it's really thinking about how many classrooms do we have and having those loaded? And then do we have enough that are kind of oversized for those programs that require a little bit more space? And so in each of the, like in this configuration, there are 3 classrooms that are oversized classrooms. That would be great for science, for art, for those kind of things. A lot of your other electives can work fine in a standard
Like
classroom.
foreign language.
Yeah, with that's just regular classrooms, that could be any of these classrooms. So I think when we think about the 4 through 8 model, or really kind of your 6, 7, 8 especially, that's kind of how to think about the loading there, which is why this configuration for that grade level has a higher capacity than the elementary configuration with the same number of classrooms. Because we can load all of the classrooms in this. Does that make sense?
Yes, that was very helpful. Thank you.
Did you have a question?
Yeah, for clarification, the case that our sort of standard elementary classroom size is basically the same size as our standard like junior high English classroom. Correct.
Yeah. And that's the same size for high school classrooms and all classrooms across the state.
Okay.
It's a state standard.
So just so I'm understanding the math correctly. So if we added, and I like what you said, we can add 1 more classroom per grade.
Yeah.
But does that bring up the total capacity to, like, what would that bring that up to?
It wouldn't change the total capacity at all because you
Because
just
they're
move
already
classrooms from unassigned into
Oh.
the other one.
Gotcha.
Yeah. I think maybe it's fair to say, like, the maximum capacity for this scenario is about 564 kids, right? And that could be X number of 4th graders, 5th graders, 6, 7, 8.
Right.
Yeah,
But if they have like one of the sped classrooms was, only had 1 and the other one was loaded at a higher level, you could add another 20 kids or.
Yeah.
sure, yeah.
Okay. Sure. Yeah, and vice versa. Yeah,
Yeah.
3 spec classrooms are good down. Any other questions about this configuration? All right, why don't you go ahead and go through concept 2.
Okay. Concept 2 is very similar to what we just looked at. The only difference is that we have moved the administration from the custom NPR building. So now admin is located in one of the Folia buildings. And for this configuration, we still looked at TK through 6. And we have 2 classes per grade. However, by moving admin into this space, this is taking up the equivalent of 3 classrooms. So we only have space for 1 flex classroom, and we don't have any special education classrooms included, and the capacity is quite low at 394. So we highlight those items here. And this is also one of those versions that Aaron was discussing where we do locate our kinder, 1st grade and 2nd grade on the 2nd floor of this building. What that means code-wise is because they will require their own dedicated exiting, this building cannot be connected to this one at all. So we can't share a walkway between these 2, as you have seen in some of our previous versions. But this does get kinder and TK, grades 1 and 2 all into the same space. Grades 1 will be separated though, just how this is laid out so that doesn't meet the concern of having the teachers for the same grade level next to each other for collaboration. So that is a little tricky with this one. And then our 1 flex classroom is located on the 1st floor here in the other Folia building. And then I can go on to the next one for this concept.
Can I ask
Oh, sure.
one quick question?
Mhm.
I know we're not talking about the site layouts that we saw before, but with those in mind, is there anything that inherently prevents the admin from being on the other leg of the wing?
No, that would be fun. So if the admin was sort of where the flex classroom.
Yeah, that's what, and I mean, you might have to shift the elevator or something, but. there's-
No, the elevator remains in the middle. I think what that does do. Yeah,
If we
I don't
put
think if you put the admin there, yeah. Again,
Okay.
it may make it a little
A little
bit bigger.
small.
a little
But
bit-
you can mirror the folio, so when we get into the details of that, there's different ways.
I just wanted to make sure, like, we don't have to get the, I just want to make sure there wasn't.
Yeah.
Have flexibility to.
We can still try and have the admin kind of be that tree. Right, but that's going to be harder in this, like, we can do things to do that better, but it's still gonna be a little bit of a challenge in this configuration where the admin is in one of these buildings. I think one of the nice things about having it in the custom building with the NPRs, put that right at the front, and we can design that in a way so it really looks like the entry.
Sorry, I should have asked this on the previous one, but is there any code about libraries having to be on the 1st floor?
So the code is that all rooms used by students 2nd grade and below. It's
Right.
not, so
Right.
that would apply to the library as well,
In
but
this
there's
one.
no specific requirement for the library.
Right, which is why I was saying I should have asked on the previous slide, but for the 4 through 8.
Yeah.
The library's on the 1st floor here, and I was just wondering, like, these are all older kids, but
The 4th through 8, you could put the library on the second floor.
Quick question.
Yeah.
Is it possible to blob on a classroom at the end of the Ls?
It's possible, but it does kind of reduce the efficiency because now it's not pre-approved anymore. So it's probably gonna be more cost effective if we wanna add one more classroom to just add it to like the NPR building. Or one of the custom buildings. Because if,
So would an alternative be to take the admin building and move it up to the NPR and add 3 more classrooms?
yeah, and that's essentially what concept 1 is.
Yeah,
Okay.
all right.
So I also have a question, like when you move the admin into the Folia building, how does that impact the amount of space that's available for like a staff lounge and workroom?
So I think the admin that we're showing here is a little bit smaller than the admin we're showing in concept 1.
Yeah, it looks
It
like
is about
like 1,000 square, 1,200 square feet small.
Yeah, exactly.
But do
So-
you think it would still be sufficient for?
It's gonna be tight. And I think we'd have to really look into that in more detail if that's the way we wanna go. I mean, I think 3,000 square feet. You know, we've worked on a lot of different elementary schools. We're just finishing master planning for Redwood City. And one of the things we're looking at there is like, what's a typical admin size? And they were looking at kind of like a 3,500 to 4,000 square foot space that would have enough offices for counseling and support and principal, have a staff area, have conference rooms, things like that. So, you know, I think it can fit, but I probably have 4,000 square foot space is a little bit more generous.
Okay, but let's say you allocated 4,000 to the office side, then you would have a remaining 4,000 for staff. Using,
No, I mean, I think
sorry, I'm
including
looking
the
at
staff.
one. Yeah, I see, okay.
We can go on to the next grade level configuration for this concept, if you're ready. This is the 4 through 8 model on concept 2. So same building configuration that we just looked at. And we are meeting our 2 classes per grade with this one. We also have 2 special education, 4 flex. Our unassigned space goes down to 3, and that's because we've moved admin into the Foley building, so that took up some classroom spaces. And the total capacity here is just under 500 at 483 students. There's our 3 unassigned spaces for the moment.
Any other questions about concept 2? You can always come back. Go ahead.
Concept 3 is where we have added a 3rd Folia building. So now we've got our 3 2-story buildings here. Admin is located in a Folia building, and then the gym and the NPR look like the previous concept. We'll just 2 standalone buildings here. And this model is going to be the TK through 8. So this was really the first one where we were able to comfortably fit all of the classrooms and achieve the numbers that we were given to us as parameters. So we have 2 classrooms per grade, TK all the way through 8th grade. We have 2 special education classrooms, 4 flex classrooms, and then 3 unassigned spaces. Total capacity of approximately 607 students. This one, because we have our younger grades dispersed throughout 3 buildings, that could become a little challenging in terms of how that may lay out on the site and creating a pod area for younger grades with a playground area dedicated to those students. But it does fit within the 3 buildings. And we did note that we are over 600 since we were given 500 to 600, but it's just barely over 600. So we're close to that target range.
Did I hear you say this was a 3rd floor?
No,
It's
it's
a
3 2-story buildings.
Okay.
3rd building, yeah.
And this concept is obviously the most expensive because it has the most space.
So that dead zone between the TK and K classrooms, can that be used for anything, or could like
Yeah.
the TKK classrooms be shifted up? Like,
So
let's
they
say we
can be
wanted to
shifted
expand the
around.
Admin,
Mhm.
right, could we shift that up? And then you could have more space for admin?
Yeah, definitely. And that's kind of part of what we would figure out. There's some structure in there that we have to work around. That's part of the pre-approved system. But, and it can definitely be offices or special education spaces, just not big enough to be a full classroom.
Okay,
about
but it's
2/3
not
of
like
the classroom.
unusable.
No, not at all. We just didn't go to the trouble of figuring out what to use it for yet.
Sure. And then,
But that'd be part of the next part.
okay, also before we move on, could you put grades 1 and 2 above the TK or K, let's say? Like you did in one of the other
You
contexts?
could, yeah,
Okay, because they can be together on the second floor, right?
yeah, we'd have to put them in the building that doesn't have. Yes, we could take one building just like we did in concept one
One.
or
yeah.
two or whichever one that was.
Where we dedicated that building.
Yeah. But we figured it would probably be preferable to have them spread out and on the ground floor than have them stacked on top of each other, but I don't know, that
Yeah, it's
either
just
way.
good to
could
know
work.
that it's an option.
Yep,
Can I think you had your hand up first, and then I got a question. on something.
Well, I mean, I think. You could. Maybe, or, well, I don't know, can you take those kindergarten classrooms and put them where the admin is and make the library and admin in one building?
Yep.
And,
Uh,
and, I mean, I know there's set out this way, like a U right now, for demonstration purposes, but once you were actually laying them on the site. You could flip them around, right?
yes,
And do weird things that solves that centralized TKK area.
I can't fit 4 in one building. I looked at it.
Okay,
On the first floor,
okay,
If they were stacked. it could-
but you could, like, flip that other building, so, anyway, they could fit on the
Right,
site. in a
they can
different
fit next to
way.
each other on the site, yeah,
Yeah.
no, I
Okay.
get your point, but to try to get the TK and Kinder closer to each other, we definitely could move things around to do.
Okay.
Andrew, can I ask you a
Yeah.
question? When we say that we want 550, past 550 students, does that mean that it's? Does that mean that we couldn't have capacity for 600, but we're only using 500, that we only assign 500?
This was just an arbitrary number, right? Of when I'm thinking about the existing schools we have and capacity. Pretty much every school has capacity, give or take, for 500 to 600 students.
Right.
So,
Like, there would be nothing wrong with this, if we just put 550 kids there, knowing we could put up to 600 instead.
sure,
Yeah, the only challenge there is the cost.
Right.
You're building more space maybe than you need.
but this would provide kind of the most flexibility, right? Most capacity in the future, for sure.
All right, I can go to the next grade level model, which is TK through 6. And this one, we still are showing 2 classes per grade, 2 special education classrooms, 4 flex classrooms. And now our unassigned number goes up to 7, and that's essentially just because we removed grades 7 and 8 and then moved that down to the unassigned category, so we could study this model at a TK through 6. So now we have significantly more unassigned space. Everything else is, I believe, in the same location that it was in the previous one. And we're still at 607 students for capacity, and that's because, as I mentioned, we took the 7th and 8th graders and just moved them down to unassigned, and we still loaded that unassigned space to show what that capacity could look like. So pretty much the same as the last one, it's just a name difference between unassigned and grade 7 and 8.
I think one thing to think about with this is, the unassigned classrooms would imply that we could just add a grade for each level. But that gets tricky with the smaller kids. Because there's not more classrooms on the first floor. And there aren't more larger classrooms either. So I think what you end up here is you can't really make the school that much bigger, but you have a bunch more space that you're not using. In this configuration of the TK says.
I'm wondering if we should be looking at PK through 5, like what if we took the grade level out?
Sure.
I think. Then.
You could add those as assigned.
Well, I mean, that moves more classrooms to unassigned, and then you'd have enough to add one to each grade, except for.
Oh,
what
but
I
you don't
just
have
said
to- you
about
don't have
you
to
don't have any
advertise.
more spaces on the first floor,
Right.
so it makes
Yeah.
it much more complicated for. The little kids.
Well, we
Not
have
that we
the
couldn't do it, because you
concept
could stack it
with-
in and you
yeah.
could do different stuff, it just makes it trickier. But it stacking it. Yeah, if we're trying to get 3 TK, 3K, 3-1, 3 first graders and 3 second graders. It would be, we'd have to do like 1 building on both floors and then the first floor of the other 2 buildings or something like that to get all of that. All of those smaller kids in buildings that are safe.
Then we also looked at this concept with grades 4 through 8. And with this one, if we stuck to the 2 classes per grade, we were left with a lot of unassigned space. So we did look at it. This is the only one where we deviated from 2 classes per grade and we showed 4 per grade. Just because of the sheer amount of classrooms that are available in all of these 3 buildings. So even with that, we do have 4 classes per grade, 2 special education classrooms, 4 flex, and there are still 5 unassigned. But this gives a capacity of 807 students. And this one, of course, still has admin and library within the fully buildings as well.
So I think with the 4A, another way to think about this is that you just have grade level cohorts of about 160 students. Please.
And then our last concept, concept 4, reintroduces the idea of admin as part of the custom building. And also the 2 single-story folios for kinder and TK. So what this does is it takes out kinder and TK from our 2-story building. So it removes some of the challenges around working around the code with having those grades potentially on the 2nd floor. It allows the folio buildings to function with the maximum amount of classrooms that they were designed for. We do have admin in the NPR, which, as Erin mentioned earlier, could create the opportunity for a really custom entry into the campus that shows this is the entrance to the campus. We have 2 classes per grade in this model. We're looking at TK through 8. So we have 2 classes per grade, 2 special education classrooms, 4 flex classrooms, and a total capacity of 526 students. So this one meets a lot of that criteria that we were looking at. The total capacity, 2 classes per grade, the amount of flexible spaces available. And then having these broken out to work around the code issues that we could run into. Sure. And this one we also looked at for TK through 6 model. So this one still has 2 classes per grade, 2 special education and 4 flex classrooms, and then 4 unassigned. And similarly to how we got to that with the other model, which is moving 7 and 8 to unassigned, that's what happened here as well. Total capacity is unchanged at 526. So this is the same as the previous version. It's just moving the 7th and 8th graders into the unassigned category for now.
Does that admin building fit in the empty unassigned space?
Yeah, it
And a
could.
little reduction of cost.
And, yeah, how
I'm
much
assuming.
that would reduce the cost of the custody, right?
Yeah, it would move that 4,000 square feet or so. And that's like oh, it's like 2.5 or something. Like, we have the other piece that sort of looks like that, but in a TK to 6 environment.
So this isn't a question. Am I free to make comments?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay, so I really, from my perspective, I'm really only interested in the TK through 8 plans because I think that gives us the most flexibility. Long term, we just don't know like what uses we might have for this site. So I am partial to the TK to 8 and I'm not really interested in the ones that are the other configuration.
I think that's a very fair comment. We want, as you're saying, the most flexibility for the next 15 years.
But it needs to work as a 2K area.
Yeah, so I mean, I agree with that. So I'm interested, I don't know whether this is the right meeting to do this, but in terms of phasing possibly, right? Like design, definitely want the campus design to have the cohesive kindergartens that are close to the parking lot and all that. And I think, you know, having them in their own buildings so that you can cluster them, like that makes sense. As long as it's possible that we just don't build them for 5 or 6 years.
Yeah, no, I think
We
that
need them.
this concept 4 lends itself to that.
Right.
Most as well, because they're separate buildings. And we can build them separately, we can stop designing them at any point where there's a decision made that we don't need them.
Right.
And it makes that kind of its own variable. right? If we take those two out, then it's concept, so you get sort of concept 2 and concept 4 for the price of 1, if you will, because you essentially have these 2 additional buildings that we add or don't add.
Well, it looks like, I mean, it seems to me like concept 4 is basically concept 1 plus 2 single story folios.
Yes.
Is that just,
Correct,
is that true? Okay.
yes. Yeah, no, that's exactly right.
And with what you said, Brian, I think we would want to, in the, I don't know what the right phase is, I'm not speaking the lingo, the design phase, whatever. We would want the space, the utility hookups, like all the things that you would want to do. And then potentially just not build them, but if we needed them in the future, we're not having
ready
to
to go.
re-dig underground and do all the things that you didn't do.
Yeah,
before.
exactly.
So can I ask one question? I know you have to finish. But, talking about the thing, just so I understand. Let's say we do it in phases, and by the time we roll around to phase 2 and the code has changed, we would still be grandfathered into the previous.
It depends on how long and how far we go. So if we get DSA approval on it and you don't build it, we can extend that approval for 3 or 4 years without having to update that. But anything beyond that, you have to take it back and get it approved under the new code.
Okay.
Does that also apply to earthquake?
Yeah, that's addressed by the building code.
What I was looking at is, in the next couple of years, there's an earthquake and the code changes. It would seem to me that ought to be imposed on any construction.
The code changes on a 3-year cycle, no matter what. And it's about to change right now, like in a few weeks, they'll publish the new code that will go into effect on January 1st. And they have already started writing new sections for the previous code. So anything that happens that impacts that will still do so within that 3-year cycle. And so once you have a DSA approval, that's good for 2 years and you can extend that one time. Within that, so you have some flexibility with that to be able to do that going forward. If we're talking about the single story buildings, those are the least likely to change significantly because they're the simplest.
Oh, yes, now I want to be even more specific, I particularly like concept 3. Because it only costs about 5 million more than concept 4, but you get, like 80, you can fit 80 more students on it. And even if you add in the soft cost, it's like an extra 6 million more. So I think it's like, if we're gonna, even if we don't build them, you can still run all the plumbing and electrical before the 2
But you
story.
have to build all both now.
Well, weren't we just talking about with concept 4, you could not build?
That was
But
Concept 4, but not concept 3.
concept 3.
You
have to
could
build all.
not
I mean,
build
you
the
could-
3rd.
You could phase it,
Building.
not build the 3rd one too. There's some work we need to do about how to fit all this on the site and to make that feasible, and that takes up more space on the site than the 2 smaller buildings, so that may make future construction a little bit tricky, but that's kind of what we can explore once we know which options we're working with.
Yeah.
That's kind of then turns into concept 1, if you don't build the 3rd one. But we couldn't fit TK through 8.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, well, no, I mean, I also favor building the 3rd one, but I'm just saying that remains an option. And as far as like the footprint though, but if you combine the 2 single-story buildings, it's 7,000 square feet. And the
Similar.
2-story one, the footprint, right, is only 8,000 square feet. So, but you get so many more.
I'm sorry, the 2-story one's like 16,000.
No, I mean, it's 8,000 square feet like on the ground, like how much ground. you
No, you're
have
right.
ground
The-
space. Yeah.
The
right, so
space
how
that
much
it takes up on the
land
ground is not.
Yeah,
is not
but you
that
get
different.
so many more classrooms out of it, and it doesn't cost that much more, and again, so many more classrooms.
Yeah,
Concept 3, that one.
So yeah, I'm partial to concept 3, the TK8 version.
I mean, that one definitely does give you the most flexibility, and it is the most expensive. And I
Right.
think in some cases, it gives you much more space than you may want for different configurations. Just based on the 500 or 600 and the 2 classes per grade and things like that, like it just depends. So if we're looking at the 4.8, that gives you a capacity of over 800. And if that's not something you need, then that would be the downside. That
Well,
option. But
I mean,
it
that's
does give you the most
previously
flexibility.
TK8, and if we're looking at TK8, I can easily imagine a scenario where we would want to have that 600 student capacity.
So I just have a question for Eric. That if we looked at, for example, concept 3, and we added that 25% of soft costs, of soft design, whatever you call it before. And to your point, the overage, right? Does that now bring us, how much of our bond does that end up?
I will tell you, I already calculated it. All right. At 110 million, if we assume that the soft costs are about 20%, because we already have the design cost built in, then it's 137.5. So that's how much of the 350 bond it would use up.
And we do have some remaining Measure N dollars that we can allocate for this project first, and I want to spend that money
Oh,
first,
sure.
right? We'd spend.
And
Measure
that's
N.
like the maximum, because 110 is the upper
Yeah,
end of the range, and it could be as low as 15% soft
Sure.
cost, so then that would be.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good maximum.
But what about the
Your math makes
commercial
sense.
overage?
So that includes
That
everything.
includes everything.
Yeah.
and depending on that cost escalation, we would have a project contingency for cost escalation as well, so we would build that, we would build that into the budget as well. So we might add a little extra in there in the budget, and then the idea is, and Aaron used the word at the beginning, the presentation about the guaranteed maximum price, once we get our design locked down, then we get a guaranteed maximum price on the design build.
Oh, so it never goes over.
Yeah, unless we do an owner directed change, where we said, oh, we want to change something and build a design, and then we have to be careful with that as well.
And that includes if we phase it, if we build something 2 years or 3 years from now. That price is
No,
still.
that would
Yeah.
change the guarantee.
That would change, because like the cost of construction is, in let's say today's dollars, it might be, if we just use 5% escalation over the next couple of years, it'd be 15% more to build it. If we decided to delay a phase, like in 3 years or something.
Plus general conditions too.
Yeah.
There's some efficiencies, the more you build it, once you've got some overhead
Right.
costs, you know, the
Yeah.
general conditions and having the team out there. oversee it.
And when we have everybody out there and mobilized, it's best to build it all at once.
Yeah.
But we've done phasing projects where you do, this is gonna be phase one, and then maybe we have to do another, something else that has to come down the road later. But if it's like Amber said, it's more efficient to have, you have everybody mobilized, all the general conditions and the site utilities, do it all at one time, if you can.
So with phasing, there's a risk then that the DSA codes would change, that it would end up costing us much more. All that. There's.
Yeah, I don't know that I would say much, but, I think all those things add a little bit of cost. I think your
Yeah.
much bigger risk there is escalation. It's just that things are gonna cost more in the future. Just, you know, especially in uncertain futures.
With tariffs and steel and all these other things, the other factors that are out there, you just don't know.
But they don't ever cost less in the future. At least not yet.
Yeah.
Thing.
Yeah.
I have a question for Sandra.
Yeah.
I think I remember that you went down to visit High Tech High.
Yep.
So if I remember correctly, I didn't go visit, but I saw some pictures. These are not high school, so. But they had one giant room and they had sort of like classrooms in the giant room there. I think the point was to allow, cooperation.
Visible learning.
Yeah, whatever.
Sure.
The way things are laid out here, we don't have any giant space. Is that something?
I
you'd
think
like?
that would be the MPR.
Yeah.
Would serve that purpose.
No, so this is, if I understand correctly, this was for classes. And so, you know, grades, well,
Sorry, I was on the trip, so
Okay.
I can add some color, I think, to what you're getting. Like, when you walked into the hallway,
Yeah.
there was
Yeah.
a large
Original high-tech. tie.
semi-multifunctional space with, I can't, but the classrooms were definitely divided off. I don't know how much they used the
The
common
classrooms
space.
are fairly small. Well, the ones that we were just in, the classrooms kind of leading that have the glass walls that you can kind of see in and see out, they're fairly small workrooms, so I think like the whole space is a little more flexible. Which works really well, I think, adding high school. I don't know if it works as well and would work great for middle school. I don't know that it works as well for an elementary school when we're doing a lot more foundational learning that happens in a more specific classroom.
yeah, I don't know where,
Yeah.
where they're flushing. I know, I think, if I remember correctly, High Tech High also opened, an elementary school.
Yeah, they have lots of elementary schools
And I
with
wonder
more
what the
traditional.
configurations are there.
Yeah, we did a tour of those, and
Yeah.
my sense was the lower the grade got, the more traditional it got.
Yeah.
Like their kindergarten was indistinguishable from our kindergarten, and there was a little bit of sort of gradual shift as you went higher grades, but even their middle schools, I think we're pretty close to
Yeah.
what we.
But there is some flexibility though, when we went on the tour to Milpitas, they had the dividing wall. That's between two rooms and where you can open up that wall, like it's like kind of a accordion type divider.
Better than the
Manual,
70s accordion.
yeah.
It was a brand, but
Yeah, but you
It's
can,
an operable.
yeah, and you can open up, you can make, two regular sized classrooms, one big room. If you had a big demonstration or some sort of group, project for, project-based learning or something like that.
We went, I mean, we also did, on that same tour, we saw Design 39, which
Yeah.
has been built with a lot of these principles in mind, and I can't speak to the teacher experience, but one of the things that I took away was that there was no space to display student work anywhere, which I actually thought made the classroom seem really cold and impersonal. So I'd be careful about chasing that trend.
I think one of the things that's built into the Foley buildings that we haven't really talked about is there are. Between the classrooms, there are these spaces. Which can be configured as a bunch of different things, and one of the main things that we use those for is breakout spaces, which is a big part of those models as well, where they have small group learning spaces. And so that's part of all of these options as well. We haven't talked about that yet, but it's kind of a baseline, and that's something as we figure out what the grade level configuration is, we'll be. Updating those layouts and getting into the design a bit more to figure out how to get.
How big are the spaces?
So they're like a good sized conference room. So they can, or I guess they can vary from like a good sized office to a good sized classroom, conference room. So like 12 by 12 up to like 12 by 20. Kind of that kind of size. So they're good for groups of sort of 4 to 8. In that range, which is generally, and then they connected to typically try to connect them to the adjacent classrooms, and they have, with a door with a window and a side light, so there can be some visibility back and forth too. Between those spaces, so that teacher can go in there with a group of students and keep an eye on their classroom, or send a group of students in there and keep an eye on them, depending on what page they are and things like that too. So that's very much a part of, I think, the way that these buildings try to respond to that same sort of project-based 21st century learning kind of model is by having those breakout spaces and the sort of double classroom opportunities, so that you have a variety of learning spaces. I think one of the other things too is the balconies and the walkways are pretty wide. And extra wide in some places, so they can be up to kind of 20 feet wide on the second floor. So there's outdoor learning spaces even on the second floor spaces, and there's glass connecting those. So again, there's supervision and visibility between those spaces. So teachers have a lot of flexibility and variety in the types of learning spaces they can use.
I don't have any opinion on whether we should or should not do this, for what particular grades, but if we're gonna build this. I would hate to have 10 years down the road go, oh God, these classrooms are so small, or whatever. So now's the time to think about that and, decide, whatever.
Absolutely.
And I wonder, Vladimir, if you want to join us on our next tour, which we don't have scheduled, but I think most others have been to that innovation campus in Milpitas. And it really is, a beautiful, very modern and inspirational space. Lots of light, lots of flexibility.
And we have some, there's the Cupertino and Edops nearby, and Sunnyvale Middle School is gonna be opening in about a month too,
Oh,
so
yeah.
that might be a good one.
Yeah.
And they have a lot of the collaboration spaces there for you to be able to see.
It took a group from Oakland Unified that we're working with on an elementary school replacement there to Milpitas on Thursday.
Yeah.
And one of the vice principals there introduced himself, so that you guys won't have any questions, but he is a former administrator at High Tech High in Sacramento.
Yeah.
And he talked about how much he appreciated that those spaces at Milpitas were designed for project-based learning.
Yeah.
And really supported what they wanted to do. In this case, it was digital media and things for their high school CTE classes, but have that flexibility built into them.
Eric, remind me, how much money do we have from N that we can use for this?
I'd probably say about 25.
So I think what we're hoping to hear from you, I'm looking through kind of all the options. 2 2-story, 3 2-story. Are there any single story? And where does the admin, is the admin in a folia or is it a special space attached to the NPR? Anything else, Erin?
Nope, you got it. And I think the one thing I'd kind of add to that conversation is I think when we do attach the admin to the NPR, it does give us a little bit more opportunity to kind of shape the entry to the school architecturally as that custom building and create kind of a clearer sense of entry than if it's part of one of these larger buildings with also classrooms. We can definitely still do that and we can create a little canopy outside of it like the Milpitas project did that too. But I think there's an additional opportunity if that admin is part of that NPR building. But it's not a deal breaker either way, just something to consider.
Well, okay,
Wait.
like point of order, we can't just ask.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if we have a public comment period.
We don't have a public comment period, but,
Well, we'll have to get in touch with us.
You don't have any comments, so that's good.
Well, I have a comment about the
Yes.
admin, and while that would, I'm sure like aesthetically possibly be more pleasing, I don't think we wanna be spending our resources in that way, especially since we don't know who will be occupying the site.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, so for me, the important thing is one of the important things is the flexibility to not necessarily build the whole thing in a single phase, like, as I said before, I mean, I'm fine, we do all the underground prep and design it for whether it's concept 3 or concept 4, I think on like an overall campus design level, I think 3 or 4 both make sense. As long as, we can not do the TK. I'm actually a little won over by Stella's comments and the thought of, one of the things that I keep in mind is that City of Mountain View has also expressed a desire to sort of see public benefit to the community for this. And there's always need for preschool spaces. And so, like, I don't know if there's a possibility of talking to them about, hey, if we built this TKK and then campus ends up being an upper school campus, could we, do you want to run a program? And I've slightly went over to concept 3, the concept that like, if we're building, I guess I went over to concept 3 as long as we have one of these wings is all of the lower grades, kind of like in concept 2.
Okay.
So that if it ends up being an upper school campus, then we can either not build that wing, or we can build that wing and that's now like a self-contained preschool, community school kind of building. Because I do think that it would be easier to sort of carve that off if we ended up wanting to use that to rent it out for a preschool or to some other community benefit. Whereas like 4 TKK classrooms, like you can sort of use that for preschool, but like they might need some admin space, it gets a little harder.
So do you need direction now on like the interior configuration of these buildings? Not right, okay.
I think what we're asking for direction on is essentially concepts 1, a concept, right? Concept 1, 2, 3, or 4. And then we can move forward, right? And that's gonna involve studying how they fit on the site and what that looks like, thinking back to all the comments you had before and things we think about normally around site design and working out the interior layouts too.
But this is only a discussion item for this meeting.
You're just giving direction, you are moving forward.
Well, I like what Brian was saying about being able to add additional community benefit about having a. I mean, if we do something like that, then we would get rental income. If we rent that space out and we're not just giving it to the city. We're just gonna give it to the city and not.
Just depends on the admin.
Depend on
The joint
negotiation.
I mean, it could be a preschool that we run, it could be, something that's rented to a community preschool.
So what concerns me is, and I love the idea, and I love your reasoning about concept 3 and why we should go for this, and then, Brian's ideas. It's just, I know that if we do this, we're not gonna have a ton of money left over for our other campuses. And I do know that we're, being very conscious about our budget right now. So I was just looking for other ways that we can have money coming in. That's all.
Oh, Shelby, what would be your, like, alternative concept? I'm curious, like, what would be your second choice or the one you're debating between? Because then we could look at what the difference in pricing is, right?
Well, you actually convinced me because
Okay,
I actually liked, concepts four. I thought that gave us the most flexibility. And it wasn't the most expensive, but just for a little bit money more, get so much more benefit. That actually makes a lot of sense. But definitely not concept. I think definitely not concept two. Yeah, I don't, yeah, one and two and that.
No, I mean, three is my favorite concept, but I'm kind of thinking from a cost perspective. You go with four. What I'm not clear on is without a doubt, concept three gives us the most flexibility to, like, any program we want there at any time in the next 50 years, whatever. But yeah, like, I feel like we could, there's some ways to save some money in concept four that still gives us some flexibility, just not all flexibility, so I'm just trying to, in my head, because I think yeah. The way we're set up now, or the direction that we're going. I don't argue, thinking that we would actually run a TK through 8 school in the next 50 years. I mean, it's possible, so I'm.
So there was a discussion way back when we were doing the LASD roadshow. If you remember, like which campus is going to whomever.
Okay.
And one of the folks had suggested we could actually put 2 schools on that, 2 small schools on that site. And so I was looking at concept 3, and if you, the 2, where they have 7th and 8th grade, like that, yeah, over there, that could be a separate 250 student school. So it could be your preschool, it could be something else. But, that's why I felt like if we decide, or it could be a community school, a little tiny community school that we run. I think that would give us a lot of flexibility in like how we configure it and how it goes for it. To your point, that's what I'm thinking.
I think just one thing I want to point out as we're sort of narrowing in on 3 or 4. If we look at the grade level configuration table, so essentially we end up with we end up in concept 3, we end up with 26 classrooms, or concept 4, we end up with 26 classrooms. And here and 3, we end up with 31, right? So 5 more classrooms. But if you notice in the grade level configurations, pretty much all the time, those end up as unassigned classrooms. Because within the range that you're trying to hit and kind of evenly distributing those classrooms along the grades, it doesn't really work out that much. It doesn't get you that, those 3 classrooms don't get you that much more sort of functional capacity in these different grade level configurations across those sites. So which doesn't mean you can't use them for something else. It just kind of noting that.
Wait, you said you get 31?
This one has 29 in the TK.
Oh.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was looking at the 4-3 because that doesn't have the TKK classroom.
Yeah.
So you're right. It's more like 3 different additional classrooms.
Okay.
Right, so if we compare TK to 8 to TK to 8, it's 29 to 26, and those 3 additional classrooms kind of end up unassigned. Yeah, but
well, I think those unassigned classrooms are actually critical, because when I think about our 7th and 8th graders and the elective offerings that they have, yeah, the 4 flex spaces just isn't gonna cut it. So I do think those
for a
unassigned
K
classrooms
configuration.
makes the, again, concept 3 so much more practical.
Well, just a comment, this is mainly for us, I think. We're thinking moving 6th grade to turning things into middle school. So really it should be TK5 and, 6 through 8 as opposed to TK6 and 4 through 8.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah.
Pretty
Your
much
schools, schools right now are TK6.
they are, yeah.
But
Yeah,
middle
the classroom and loading
Yeah.
is all like mix and match, right? Whatever configuration you're looking for.
Yeah, so 4 through 8 could be 6 through 8, and it would just be a different number of classrooms for each grade level. But it's just, the main thing is then you don't have the TK and K because those classrooms take up so much more space.
How much money would we save if the admin building was not a custom building? Because I do like the idea of having a nice entrance to the campus. I love that. But it sounds very practical about, we could spend that money on our kids as opposed to like on admin. So I'm just
So, I
wondering
mean,
how
I
much
think-
money that would cost.
One way to think about the difference between concept 4 and concept 3 is like, they both have the 2 Foley buildings, they both have the NPR and the gym. Right, and in concept 4, you have about 11,000 square feet of single-story buildings in these 2 buildings and this piece.
Mhm.
And in concept 3, you have 16,000 square feet of 2-story buildings. There's just kind of changing, and that's why this one's a little bit more, because it has 5,000 square foot more buildings. And it's a little bit more cost efficient because they're all in the building. So you really kind of have that distinction here. We're using most of the same class, you're 3 classrooms less here, a little bit less efficient. And, but you have a little bit more flexibility with how they're laid out, and you have more custom square footage.
Is it reasonable to think of, the admin building being essentially a copy of a wing there, which is one Foley building?
As sort of one of these,
Yeah,
yeah, it's similar in size.
These are not places.
so it doesn't have to be custom, sorry.
It doesn't have to be, it could be, we've done, I think that was one of the layouts we showed you last time, had a third kind of single story building that was that.
So the only point that I was gonna make, and maybe think about Vladimir, is that if the admin is, and I know you said we can kind of mix and match this forever, but if the admin is way deep in the campus, you don't want strangers or parents walking through the entire campus to come get a badge that says, I'm a visitor.
Yeah, we want admin up front. We don't want it on a second story,
Yeah.
right? There are some limitations.
And I think if the admin is in one of these Folia buildings, then, you know, it'll be in the part of it that's closest to the
Yeah.
parking lot. And we'll be looking at what if you say we're going this direction, then our next step is to figure out, okay, how do we configure these buildings best work on the site, including for access control?
This is the one thing about concept 3 that I'm having trouble picturing is a layout that makes sense, that keeps admin where it needs to be, but still has a younger grade wing that could be deferred. So I think that's,
Well, you know, the concept 3 that we looked at last time, they had the TK single story there and the K single story here. But like, we could just put an L-shaped.
no, but that's what I'm saying.
Thing
So if
right
you do
there.
that L shape and you put admin in that
Right.
2-story, but then you can no longer, you can no
Yeah.
longer necessarily
So you
Up to
can't,
defer the TKK, like,
Right,
you can't
but then
put-
admin wasn't a- Yeah, but that was also toward.
sure. I mean, I don't know that we have to solve now, but that's something that I was.
I think
Quite possibly could be.
Is it possible? I mean, I know we have to vote on this today. When we get that.
Well, we're not voting today.
No, not here. In the evening. There are those. No,
It's not our-
we're not voting.
You're just giving us direction.
This
moving forward.
direction. Yeah, okay, because it would be, I think whatever concepts we're all kind of coalescing around, it would be really helpful to see whether it's practical on the campus itself.
and I think what we're asking for is like, we really like option 3, go back and explore that, see how it fits in the site, and then we'll bring it back to you. It's not written in stone, right?
Yeah.
It's going to be drawn on paper and modeled in a computer.
Yeah.
And it can be changed, and we may come back and be like, we really don't think this works, we think you maybe should reconsider going to option 4 or whatever, but I think we're fairly confident that we can make each one of these work on the site. But some of them are a little bit more tricky than others.
From a practical standpoint, like when's the sort of deadline for finalizing the interior allocation?
If we we get direction today and we're really moving forward on the design of the buildings, like, I think we wanna have that finalized ideally like in the early fall. So that we could do that, but it is, you know, that would be the time at which we need to know to keep kind of things moving. Now, if we move forward based on one set of assumptions and have to change some of the interior layouts, that's much less impactful than changing the building configurations. So if we move forward under one set of assumptions in the interiors and 3 months later you say, actually, we changed our mind, we want to go to this configuration, it's gonna change a lot less. A lot of the changes will just be assignments to classrooms. It's really just gonna be around the TKK kind of question in that configuration.
Can I just get a sense from board members if we are coalescing around one or two? Are you
I,
leaning toward?
three has always been my favorite, so.
Oh, yeah, I said so early in the meeting.
One?
Yeah, I mean. Aesthetically, I like 4 better, but I think for practical, I like 3 probably makes more sense as long as it's. You know, as long as I said, we can defer some of it if we need.
Right, it could be that third building is not yet done.
Right. Which we've always talked about.
Right.
We're talking about it.
One, my favorite. I think 3 gives, I'm leaning towards 3, though I really like how 4 gives us an entrance to the campus and it also kind of, I guess it's for aesthetics.
Well, so my preference would be, if we're gonna go forward with 3, I would, if there's any way, I would love to see the campus design so that if we wanted to add a beautiful entry office, we could. So maybe that's just leaving a little bit of space.
Well, I think a great direction for you guys too would be, we want to go forward with option 3, but we're concerned about how the front of the school is going to look and how the admins configure it and where TK and K are.
Right.
So work on that and come back. Like, that's essentially what we're.
I'm gonna take a little break and take public comment. To kind of.
Just one thing I know, at our previous study session, we talked about trying to get the admin building in the front of the school for safety and security, which is always the best place for it. And then the NPR closer to the front because of events and things like that, and then also TK and K for, so it was hard to get it all in the front. But then as we talked about it, and that's where I think the design team will need some direction, is that of all the buildings, the NPR doesn't have to be in the front because it's going to be well lit, so there'll be pathway lighting to get to it if it's not right in the front of the campus. Because I think that's one of the dilemmas is whatever layout we go with, we can't get the admin building and everything all in the front. There's only so much space. So I think that's just some design parameters, but I think we all decided the last time the NPR, it'd be great if we could get in the front, but if the admin building in the front is obviously a higher priority, then we'll have to move the NPR a little bit more in the side of the side of the site, I guess.
And I would say admin is good, the highest priority to be at the front. I think the TK and K is nice to have at the front.
Yeah.
Stella, and then we'll go.
Okay, well, since we're talking about, what we'd like to see you bring back to, I will say, I did like some of the ideas that I heard today about maybe putting admin in the library in the same L-shaped. And also having like the TK and K classrooms closer together again in the same building and even including the 2nd floor. So that's something I would like to see.
And it sounds like there's a preference for including the grade 2 and under in one building on both floors rather than distributing them across the first floor.
Right. Yeah, and then you can also, I'd also like to see more space allocated to admin. Part of them.
Those aren't my preference.
And then similar grades being able to collaborate. That's the it. Okay, Marcy, do you have any public comment? Oh, I do. Okay.
My only comment was,
Would you like to announce who it is? And we'll give that person.
my only comment was for Sandra and Carrie about making sure that you list what should go on the admin. Because I think when people think admin, they think me and they think principal. And they're not thinking about chat, they're not thinking about wellness, they're not thinking, and I think that could be really helpful for figuring out how much space you really need, because a surprising amount is now started, especially at the junior high level. A surprising amount is packed into those spaces that people aren't thinking of. Counselor, multiple counselors. Like I think some of the juniors highs now have 2 counselors and everything. And so I think that could be helpful mostly when you're thinking about all that, plus the fact that it looks like to me, staff lounge and staff workroom is in admin now, which isn't true at all campuses. So like for me, I know I was looking through this going, where would those go? So I think that could be really helpful space wise, just to know why you would need so much space. It does add up quite a bit, just to make those spaces available.
Thank you, that was a very fair. Appreciate it. And then, of course, our wellness center is all in.
Yeah.
After discussion. Is there any other direction that we would like to? Look up at the test? Do you feel like you've gotten enough information from us?
I do, I think so. You guys agree that we have, we're moving forward with essentially, as I stated earlier, that, option 3 with the, understanding that we want to have, grades 2 and under in one building on both floors.
As an option,
Or that's the
not the only
preference.
option.
That's the preference.
Jim did not.
That's not my preference, that's your preference.
Okay.
I think you could put them in a way that they're all on the same floor and they have a play area in the middle, because you twist the
Show them
building.
what you
Okay, well, we can explore different.
Yeah, they know how to do that.
Right,
Yeah.
so I think you could do that, but then it's not gonna be delete the PK and K spaces in the short term.
Thanks.
Oh, I see what you're saying, yeah.
What, I just want to make sure that he's,
Hmm?
the direction he has is the direction that.
So we're gonna explore option 3 essentially, and that's really the direction that we need. Understanding that we need to look at different ways to accommodate TTA and K, we need to look at how they arrange on the site. So that we have the right things close, many of the right things close to the front of the school as we can. And then we're going back to some of those smaller detail options about like making sure we have enough shade and outdoor space and kind of how all that would work together. And so our next step will be now to sort of proceed into schematic design of taking that and working through some different options and implementing the site, and we'll work with Sandra and Eric to get some preliminary feedback. And then figure out the right time, probably in the fall, with the back date to you all. In August or something. Does that make sense?
Refresh my memory, what grades are not allowed to be on the second floor?
2nd grade and below.
No, they're allowed to be on the same floor.
Does not with other.
Subject.
Yeah, they're essentially the way it reads is rooms used by those grades are not allowed to be on the 2nd floor, except when. And there are certain exceptions to that, the primary one being if they have dedicated circulation that's not used by other students. So if we keep them in their own building, it's not connected to the other buildings on the 2nd floor. then-
Oh, you can run faster.
They got little legs, they can only go so far, especially up and
And I
down.
will tell you, no kindergarten teacher wants to be on the 2nd floor.
Which if we
Without a doubt.
put
Yeah.
2 through, TK through 2,
Yeah.
some of them are, the kindergarten teachers will have to be on the 2nd floor. Which is a challenge.
I think of the TK kids on our campus, the steps as big as almost high.
Yes.
They're so cute. They're
Oh, little kids.
Yeah, it's getting younger. Well, I guess it's last year.
All right, we did it.
Great.
Thank you.
Look, under
We are
time.
adjourned.
Uh,